Dave, welcome to Double Coverage Radio. Tonight, the last night of June, the 30th in 2020. It's good to have you on the show. Tonight, we're going to talk about some current NFL offseason items on the agenda, talk a little bit about free agency involving a team in the upper northeast of the U.S. and a team that we love from the AFC and a recent quarterback signing, former MVP Cam Newton. And we're going to talk a little bit about some other headlines across the league. My name is Travis Pipes. He is Dave Mogensen. Dave, where are you broadcasting live, remote, on assignment tonight from?
I am in Quincy, Illinois tonight, doing some work out in Quincy next couple days.
We want to also give you a big congratulations. Didn't have a show last week due to the birth of Dave's son, Donovan. There he is. Cute. Donovan, what did he weigh in? What's the measurables there for the Mogensen Combine?
He was smaller than his next in line brother. He was just a little over 6 pounds. So, but he's really long. All the newborn stuff is too short for his arms and his legs. So he's going to be built like his mom.
So possibly a swing tackle, maybe an offensive lineman on the interior. How do you feel about where he plugs into the family during those Thanksgiving football games?
I don't know. We'll see. Maybe he'll be a basketball guy. He'll be like 6'8" or something.
We also want to take a minute to thank our sponsor, Hansen's Screen Printing, based in Elkhorn, Wisconsin. For all your screen printing needs, check them out at hansonscreenprinting.com. They're based in Elkhorn, Wisconsin. Dave, let's go ahead and get started with some of our content tonight related to NFL training camps. What's your take on whether or not this season is actually going to happen? There's been some commentary from a number of pretty plugged-in NFL alumni, among them Rodney Harrison, former Chargers and New England Patriots safety. If you're an NFL coordinator, coach, or player in any capacity, are you getting ready for the season to kick off as it normally would? And what do we have now? Less than 70 days.
I think they're definitely all getting ready, right? We went through this when we talked with Eric Tresky and from Wisconsin Lutheran College, and we talked about making sure you're prepared for whatever the drop day is. So if you're expecting training camps to open on July 24th or when they normally would open, or even July 30th, you're preparing so when that day hits, you're ready to go. If they end up pushing it back, then you just have more time to do some extra preparation. So I think everybody in every room is getting ready for that, but I really am struggling to understand how it's going to happen in a normal setting, right? The big jump off is going to be NBA, and that's not starting until the end of July. So right now you're hearing all the reports of different guys from NBA teams coming down with the coronavirus. And it's hard to imagine having football traveling from town to town to town and being able to do it the same way as we normally would do it. So do I still think NFL will happen in some way, shape, or form? Definitely. But I definitely think it's going to be something that's going to have to be creatively thought out, kind of like how the NBA is doing it all down in Orlando. I don't see it being traveling from city to city and trying to get people in the stands. It just doesn't seem like that's going to be feasible right now.
So if you're a NFL player or maybe even a college player, some capacity, getting ready to kick off in the fall at some point, how are you getting yourself prepared? What's your routine, given that you've spent the entirety of the offseason away from the facilities, no offseason program, no OTAs, no mini camps, no rookie camp? Who is this going to impact the most when it comes to whoever makes the final roster whenever cut down day happens in September?
Yeah, I definitely think it's going to be something that's going to hurt those guys who are fighting for positions on the team. We talked about this when we were on the Manitowoc radio show last week, and just talking about who's it going to affect, right? So we already had the Hall of Fame game canceled, the Hall of Fame induction, canceled for this year or pushed back or to a later date. But high probability they're probably going to cancel some preseason game, right? Maybe just run a couple of preseason games. So is that going to affect the top guys, the starters? Very little, right? It's not going to affect them very much. A little bit less practice time, but it's really going to have a drastic effect on the undrafted free agent guys, the guys who are late round picks trying to beat somebody out to make a team. We already saw that with the draft, with the amount of guys that didn't get opportunities that normally would get opportunities from the small schools and things like that, guys with less exposure. So we saw that already with the draft. That's just going to be magnified for all those guys. And it's unfortunate because some of the best players that have ever played NFL history are guys that were undrafted guys. Just thinking of a Wisconsin guy, Tony Romo, undrafted guy, probable Hall of Famer, right? So Doesn't mean that those guys who are undrafted aren't good enough, but there might be a guy who doesn't get the opportunity this year. And once you kind of don't get that opportunity, it's hard to get back knocking on that door, right? If somebody gave you a shot, brought you to minicamp, and you don't make it, very often you don't get another chance for another NFL team. You're going to the CFL, you're going to the IFL, indoor football league or something, trying to work your way back to get an opportunity. So that's the guys that I think will be the most hurt by cancellation of mini camps, cancellation of summer stuff, and then the preseason being shrunk down if that's what happens.
So that being said, Dave, if we take a look at what the roster shakeup's going to be, do you think there's a possibility that the players union would advocate for an expansion of the rosters, maybe expanding a little bit of the practice squad, maybe going from 10 guys to 15, maybe expanding the active roster from 53 guys to 60? How do we look at it from the terms of player safety and what your backup plan is going to be, given that there's so much uncertainty in the world right now with COVID, especially as it applies to athletics?
Yeah, there's been a lot of talk with that, especially if you've been following all the Major League Baseball negotiations to bring them back and get them started, right? One of their things was to have a special kind of disabled list or injured list for people, guys with COVID, so you can kind of just drop them to a different list and have other guys come in. Do I think they'll push for more? I don't know if they'll necessarily push for more. I think they would really want to try to save the amount of money. If they get to a point where they're trying to cut the season down, they might have to go into negotiations, much like Major League Baseball did. Is how much are the guys going to get paid if they're only going to play, say, a 10-game season, regular season, right? How much are they going to get paid for that? But I definitely think that there will be some discussions on an extra injured list for guys specifically who contract COVID-19 and able to put them and not count them towards their regular injured list for a guy that gets a physical injury.
Speaking of our regular lists, we have Nate Hansen watching from the shop live tonight in Elkhorn, Wisconsin. Again, thanks to Hansen Screen Printing for all of Double Coverage Radio's apparel. Check them out online at hansenscreenprinting.com. Great to have you checking us out tonight live, Nate. I know he's a big Elkhorn fan. The other thing we want to talk about tonight as we get into what is the status of the NFL season is, what do you do if you're in a coaching position or somebody on the staff and you say, how are we going to evaluate players? We don't have as much in-person contact. I know there's been some recommendations this week, Dave, made around the opportunity to say, hey, maybe we need to take a step back from some of these organized team activities that are going on. Tom Brady in Tampa Bay is a good example. Kyler Murray with the Arizona Cardinals, given the current state of that condition of COVID-related issues in Arizona, with the state maybe taking a little bit of a hiatus and maybe getting back to a place where they're a little more regulated. What do you do if you're a coaching staff member? Do you say, hey, we've got 16 Zoom meetings a week. Here's your playbook. We're going to be checking in with the captains of the groups. How do you get yourself prepared as a coaching staff member to say, hey, this is where we expect you to be when things get ready and we strap on the pads in August?
Yeah, I definitely think it's something that's a little bit of uncharted territory for NFL coaches, right there. Most NFL coaches are guys that want things done by the book. They want things done in the order they want them done. And many of them we used to having some OTAs by now. Now there's always the veterans that never come to OTAs. So it's not a huge difference at this point yet for the veterans. We talked already about the rookies and the undrafted guys. They would have had a nice mini camp and the OTAs, and that's huge for them. That's really the most important thing for those guys. So I think from a coaching staff perspective, they're trying to make sure they stay on top. Just think about what you would do in the offseason, right? Especially for the young guys. Stay on top of them, stay communicated with them, give them all the workouts and stuff like that. From an NFL perspective, most of the guys have some opportunity to find a nice gym and get all the equipment they need to work out. There's guys organizing. Tom Brady's organizing. Kyler Murray, Devontae Adams from the Packers have been organizing workouts. So there's guys that are getting workouts that way. If you go back down in the college where it gets a little bit iffy, right? So not every player at Alabama, every player at Wisconsin has the ability to go to a nice gym and get all the workout equipment they need. So that's where it gets a little bit wishy-washy what guys are doing. But at the end of the day, for an NFL player, like, this is their profession, right? So they can't come to the office. They have to work from home, as millions of Americans had to do in certain jobs through this pandemic, right? So they have to do their work from home, and I think all the coaches will definitely be making sure that they understand that the expectation is that you come in ready to go from a cardio, from a conditioning standpoint, from whatever weight you're supposed to be at, and things along those lines, and then the mental edge of playbooks and stuff like that that's going in.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, there's a certain expectation, right, around how do we expect you to be when you come into camp. you hit that scale for the first time and you do your weigh-ins, which brings us to our question for your audience tonight as we talk a little bit about NFL training camp and the uncertainty of the 2020 NFL season. Dave, should some NFL teams open camp on time with their own team-regulated conditions? I know we heard Pittsburgh head coach Mike Tomlin talking about we need to have an element of fairness across the board on that spectrum, right? Around if some teams aren't available to have their facilities open, a la the Arizona Cardinals, does a team like the Green Bay Packers, whose facility has been open for 2 weeks now in various levels of recognition there, do they have a competitive advantage in being open? And do you think the NFL needs to step in and sort of do a blanket regulation as we get ready for the upcoming off-season program to begin?
Yeah, I definitely think it's something that surprisingly the NFL hasn't, they came out right away and said open when you're able to open, right? So again, there is a lot of restrictions as to what guys can do right now with the CBA, the last CBA they signed. There's a lot of different restrictions, so it's not a huge of a deal. But if they're allowing, players to come into Green Bay, and I know AJ Dillon's been in Green Bay, looking at Packers guys draft pick, he's been in Green Bay since before the virus hit. So he's right when the virus hit, I should say, right when the draft happened. So he's been working out at facilities in Green Bay, and now he's able to get into the Packer facilities. So it's definitely a somewhat of a competitive advantage for those guys, but I don't think it's that big of a competitive advantage for the veterans.
What is your take? Speaking of AJ Dillon, Aaron Jones was asked about him in a media call this week with general manager Brian Gutekunst, who got on a call and said, "What's our take on the position?" Aaron Jones said, "They're always going to bring bodies in." How is that across the board for each organization? I know you have an opportunity to have your background with the Green Bay Blizzard and other teams in the indoor professional football leagues. What's the next man up philosophy, and how does that apply to where we are currently with the sort of uncertainty of the landscape around us?
Yeah, I think it goes back into, again, not being able to maybe do as much research on guys throughout the end of the draft process, right? Especially some of those guys that you might, it's easy to get film on guys from BCS schools. There might be some really good players from FCS or from smaller schools. So, but every team has a board, right? So you have your guys on your team, and then let's say your center gets hurt, your backup center gets hurt. You got a list of 10 centers, and you're ready to pull the trigger on them. So it's not like somebody gets hurt, then you're going to go and try to find somebody else. You already have your scouting department has guys lined up, ready to go. Many times, if they're the top guy on the list, they've already told them, "Hey, if our center goes down this week, we're going to call you. If you're our next wide receiver on our list, we're going to call you." So it's not something that teams are not prepared for in all aspects of pro football. So again, it just goes into those lists might be a little smaller than in past years because they weren't able to get out to colleges and see guys and have all the interviews they normally would have had and stuff like that. So the list might be smaller, might be from a smaller pool of colleges or things like that. But I still think the scouts have been working. They've been watching tons of film. Coaches have probably been watching more film than they normally would themselves. So I think they'll be prepared for that aspect. Again, it goes into what's going to happen if a guy comes down with COVID-19. How's that going to affect? Where do they put him on the injured list and things along those lines?
Yeah, what do you do if all of a sudden Aaron Rodgers tests positive for COVID-19, and you've got his backup quarterback, whoever that is, whether it's Jordan Love or whether it's whoever starting the game? Do you think that it affects the planning for all intents and purposes for each of these organizations?
Yeah, I think that was an article today from Rodney Harrison, and he talked a little bit about that aspect, right? He used the Saints and the Falcons, and if the Saints were going to play the Falcons, and on Tuesday Matt Ryan came down with a positive test, that totally changes the whole game plan for the Falcons, and they probably don't have as good of a shot. They definitely don't have as good as a shot. Any starting quarterback goes down. So I think there's two avenues there that people have to think about, or maybe two or three, right? First one is if a big guy gets the virus, that's going to change the whole dynamic. That's like him going down with an injury. Aaron Rodgers has missed a couple of seasons with injuries, and that's the same difference, right? So that's one thing. The second thing is, we've seen as we learn more and more about the virus, the amount of people that have it and are asymptomatic. So the other part is, if you're Aaron Rodgers and you get tested and you have the virus, but you're asymptomatic, what happens then? Does he continue to play? Does he not tell people? You got to get that avenue of these guys are professional athletes. They're driven for success, and this is the same reason a guy might, maybe Bill Belichick doesn't exactly tell everybody who's on the injured list, right? For that same reason, for a competitive advantage. It's another avenue that you have to kind of understand and make sure that the proper protocols are in place from the league, that teams are testing, teams are being honoring the testing, and teams are being upfront about who gets it. How long is a guy going to be out when he gets it? Is it 2 weeks? Is it 3 weeks? Is it an automatic, whether he's asymptomatic or he's in a bad shape, right?
For those of you that are watching that just tuned in, Dave is in Quincy, Illinois on the road on assignment. I am in Butler, Wisconsin at the Butler, Wisconsin studios. You are watching Double Coverage Radio, available streaming online at www.doublecoverageradio.com and available via social media, Twitter at Double Coverage with no E13, and Facebook, which is where we are showing this particular video live as we speak. Dave, let's switch gears a little bit and talk about free agency and a big signing this week at the quarterback position for the New England Patriots, a guy that was largely unrecruited during the process. How big of a win is this if you're Bill Belichick in terms of trading one Hall of Famer in Tom Brady for another in Cam Newton?
Yeah, I mean, definitely think they've been linked kind of together. As soon as Tom Brady, we knew he was leaving, right? And that was kind of right before free agency. You knew Tom Brady was leaving.
Right.
Right away, it was Cam to the Patriots is going to happen, right? And then Bill Belichick never likes to show his hand, right? So he didn't mention it. He didn't say anything on it. But if you go back in time and you start looking at some of the things Bill Belichick has said about Cam Newton in the past, he's had nothing but really great things to say about Cam Newton, how great of a player he is, how hard he is to play against. Now you read some of the articles that came out that he called Norv Turner, he called some of the other coaches that worked with Cam, and they all gave him glowing reviews, right? Even Norv Turner went as far as to say is the only reason Cam Newton's not a Panther and is available is because he's been injured the last year and a half. The last season he was really healthy was 2018. First half of the season they were 6-2, and he had the 18 touchdowns and 4 picks. He was on pace
Yeah,
for maybe
his
another
TD to
MVP
interception
season.
ratio was
Yeah,
pretty outstanding. Yeah, agreed.
and then he gets injured, right? He's injured for the rest of 2018. He's injured last year, and he's not the player that he once was, only because of the injuries. And they're not something that doesn't seem like he can overcome. So I think definitely, again, Bill Belichick proves to be, the smartest guy in the room, wades in the weeds, gets Cam Newton to agree to come in and get a chance to start. He's not promised a starting job. The Patriots had very little cap space, so they had to wiggle through with some incentives and signing a minimum deal for a little over $1 million a year plus some incentives that I'm sure they can work around the salary cap if he hits them. But I think definitely no offense to Brian Hoyer or Jarrett Stidham, if Cam Newton's healthy, which for all intents and purposes it seems like he's healthy, there's no way he's not the starter, and it's going to be pretty exciting to see what the Patriots can do and what Josh McDaniels can do with Cam Newton. Don't forget, Josh McDaniels rode Tim Tebow to some success in Denver, and Cam Newton is Tim Tebow style, but ages and way more talented than Tim Tebow was. So that'll be an exciting dynamic to kind of watch when the season plays out.
Yeah, I think Bill Belichick, you don't have to say it beyond this 3 words, the Patriot way, finds a way to bring a very capable starting quarterback caliber type player. I'm not sold on Jarrett Stidham for all the obvious reasons, other than he was a 4th-round pick from a sort of a middling Division I program. If they had the faith in him to be the starter, I think obviously Bill Belichick would have passed. But Bill Belichick gets a pass, right? The Antonio Brown experiment blew up in his face, right? And nobody even says a word. So, that's what happens when you win 6 Super Bowl championships. So, Mike Nordentoft, who is watching the show tonight from Illinois, you guys are in the same state, Dave. He's on the other side of the state, just outside of Chicago. Mike Nordentoft, thanks for tuning in tonight. But will he be able to stay healthy? We're talking about Cam Newton now. He hasn't been able to stay healthy in recent years. Obviously, health is sort of the dice roll of this equation, right? Cam Newton, when healthy, has an incredible run and pass dynamic to his game. He's a game tilting type of talent. His touchdown to interception ratio, which you just touched on a few moments ago, is probably in the top third of the league, if not higher. He's a player that defenses have to game plan for when he's healthy. So obviously, coming off that Lisfranc injury, Dave, you can speak to this as a former offensive coordinator. If you guys can't technically pivot, do what you need to do in some of those positions where you're going to be running those 3 and 5 step drops and running some of those short patterns, you have to pivot on that foot. It's going to be real difficult for him to make some of those throws. How important is it then, taking a look at some of his injury history, to say, hey, yes, on paper, he's a MVP candidate that's got a clear path to a starting job. Is he a guy you have faith in? If he was on your coaching staff, how would you plan around that?
I mean, there's definitely it's definitely an issue, right? I think that's one of the biggest reasons that he wasn't signed. That's one of the biggest reasons he had to sign an incentive laden contract, right? Didn't get a big deal. Is he hasn't really been healthy for a season and a half, so a year and a half calendar wise, right? He had the shoulder thing that he went through. He had some surgery on his shoulder before 2019. Obviously, the feet stuff. So it's not like he's had giant major injuries, but injuries that kept him unhealthy. And they weren't things that happened because he got hit really hard or something. It just kind of gradually happened and freak weird things. So, if he's on my team, the biggest thing that might hurt him is they can't get him into the facility right now, right? They can't get him to see exactly what he can do. Is it going to be the Cam Newton that we saw, 5 years ago, and he's going to really be pounding the football, running the ball, and things like that? No, he's not going to be doing that same stuff. But I think you'll see a hybrid. You'll see Josh McDaniels with the quick passing game, work in the middle of the field with Edelman and stuff like that. You'll see all that stuff, and then you'll be able to sprinkle in some of the other things, some of the things that you see that Lamar Jackson is doing, that Patrick Mahomes doing, and some of the RPO stuff that you didn't really see a lot of that out of Tom Brady because it wasn't his style. I think that's definitely something that the last couple of years there's been talk that Bill Belichick really wants to pursue that. There was some talk of Lamar Jackson getting drafted by the Patriots, 2 years ago. That was kind of the link that if he's there, the Patriots are going to take him because Bill Belichick thinks that that's the kind of quarterback you need moving forward. So he's got the opportunity here to get Cam Newton, who, if healthy, again, if as Mike says, if healthy is a big if, right? But for all intents and purposes, Cam's been posting his workout videos. He is healthy right now, and it'll be up to Josh McDaniels and Bill Belichick to kind of gauge an offense that allows him to stay healthy, stay upright, and still use his athletic ability to some degree as well.
Yeah, I think obviously the tendencies are to say, yeah, he's had some success. He took Carolina to a Super Bowl appearance. He's a former league MVP, so everything on paper sort of lines up for him to have a sort of a resurgent season. I'm looking forward to whatever happens. Either roll the dice, either way. Dylan Eisenbarth, as we continue to talk about Cam Newton, thanks for tuning into the show tonight, Dylan. Is Cam the starter, Dave, or is he trade bait? I'm not a big fan of the trade bait phrase because I think in the NFL, and as you can attest to being a coach professionally in the indoor league, you're literally one play away from having another player have to take snaps. How valuable is it then to have a player with his pedigree be on the roster and be in a position to either come into the game if he's not starting, for example, if Hoyer starts off the season or maybe he has some issues with injury, to have him on the roster and say, hey, this is a guy we can count on. He's done it before.
Yeah, I personally don't think that Cam Newton is trade bait. He's got a 1-year deal. It's a kind of show me deal, right? If anything, who I think may become trade bait is Stidham, right? If Cam Newton comes in and he's healthy and he has a great camp and things along those lines, and Bill Belichick feels pretty strongly he can get 2 or 3 or 4 more years out of Cam Newton, that might make Stidham a guy that they can, have a good preseason and turn him over for a second or third round pick and get a little bit of draft capital. The Patriots did just lose a third round pick for the little Bengals filming episode from last year, right? So they are down a draft pick.
Yeah.
So I think if anybody becomes trade bait or expendable because of this, it could be Jarrett Stidham. Cam Newton, if he's healthy, should be the starter. Brian Hoyer is a great backup, fantastic guy to have. He's one of the best backup quarterbacks in the NFL. So those two guys would be fine holding down the fort there, and then that might make Stidham the odd man out. And you hopefully he has a good preseason, and you try to push him up to replace that lost third round pick.
It's kind of interesting, right, that Bill Belichick somehow sneakily the same weekend that they revealed the fine from the league and the punishment, losing a third round pick, which a day 2 pick, in my opinion, is a pretty significant penalty for any team. But New England takes Cam Newton, and there's some circles that I think would say after the signing of Cam Newton that do you think the Patriots would have traded a third round compensatory pick for the rights to Cam Newton, even if he was injured? I think the answer to that question is yes.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that they probably kicked the tires on it before he was released. But again, I think Bill Belichick, he's proven to, he wants to go out and get guys. He's got laundry lists of guys that everybody else wrote off, starting way back with, Curtis Martin was a guy that they wrote off, and Corey Dillon and running backs and guys like that. And he's got a list of guys and Randy Moss, right? So, but he definitely wants to get guys on his terms at his dollar amount and make sure that they're buying into, as you put it, the Patriots way. So I don't think Bill Belichick, he probably wanted Cam from the beginning, but he definitely wasn't going to pull any strings too early. He wasn't going to put the ball in Cam's court and kind of show any desperation. So as it's proven with Bill Belichick over the last 20 years, it kind of fell in the same way that it kind of does for the Patriots, and he got him at the time he wanted him with the right price that he wanted him, and obviously Cam said all the right things in their interviews and their conversations to bring him to New England. I think we lost Travis there for a second, it looks like, guys, but he's back.
A little bit of a technical difficulty there. Just wanted to take a quick second and turn the lights on here in the studio and take a minute to talk about Hansen's Screen Printing. Located in Elkhorn, they are our go-to for all screen printing and embroidery needs. Check them out on the internet, on the web at www.hansen with an e screenprinting.com. Dave, couple of things here as we continue to talk a little bit about free agency. I know we're talking about signings and impact players. We talked about undrafted guys. We talked about players that potentially could be affected on the back end of that roster. Realistically, how many players are competing for those last 10 to 12 spots in an NFL roster?
Well, I mean, you're looking at what their cut downs are, right? So you're going to lose 40, 30 to 40 guys, really almost 50 guys. You're going to lose from when they sign them through the mini camps and things like that to get down to that 55-man roster. So you're going to have that issue there to compete for that, and that's not going to change unless they do some kind of roster upgrades and giving them some more roster spots. But you're talking free agents. There's still a lot of interesting players out there. We talk a lot about Packers on here. There's a lot of guys that have been linked to the Packers, but there's some really quality players still left in free agency. Starts with Jadeveon Clowney. He's still unsigned, and every day he's kind of saying another team. It was Seattle. Then he's saying, "I'll go play for Dallas. Maybe I'll play for Cleveland. Maybe
I'm going to go play for Dallas." And right.
So there's a laundry list of really good football players still out there trying, looking for a free agent contract. It'll be interesting to see if they pull the trigger early and try to get some signing bonus money, and just in case the season doesn't happen, they still have some money in their pocket, or if they just kind of keep waiting it out and seeing where it goes.
Do you think it was interesting that Dallas went the route of Aldon Smith, who hasn't played a down of meaningful football in 6 full seasons, over Jadeveon Clowney? Do you think that there's maybe potentially some writing on the wall as it applies to sort of a situational 1 or 2 dimensional, edge rushing pass rusher that doesn't always set the edge well? Is it just a scheme fit with him? Is it his contract demands? Why is Jadeveon Clowney still out there on the free agent market? It just seems kind of puzzling that a guy of this caliber is still sitting around and his agent isn't saying to him, "Listen, in a shortened season, wouldn't you take the guaranteed money and toll another year towards your unrestricted free agency in 2021?
Yeah, I definitely think, from the Aldon Smith perspective, Cowboys take a flyer and a guy that, for cheap, that could be fantastic. He's had numerous multi-digit sack seasons before he started getting kind of that off the field trouble, and for all intents and purposes, he seems to be in a good place mentally, in a good place, and he's a guy that if he comes in and he's even half of what he was when he was playing for San Francisco, he's a steal for the Cowboys. And it sounds like Mike McCarthy and Mike Nolan out in Dallas want to run kind of a hybrid 3-4-4-3 scheme, kind of put together kind of a couple of different defenses that Mike McCarthy ran when he was with the Green Bay Packers. So Aldon Smith fits that really well. He can put his hand down and rush. He can stand up on in two-point stance and do some stuff there as well. So that aspect seems like a good fit for them. Jadeveon Clowney, do I think he's going to go to Dallas? Probably not. For him, it seems like a contract. He wants $20 million a year, and it seems like nobody wants to pay him more than 13 or 14. So that's a big number to kind of compromise to, and I think that's the biggest reason why he's out there. I wouldn't be surprised if he sits out and waits till training camp's almost over and see if somebody gets hurt or something like that. So, Jadeveon Clowney's made a lot of money the last few years. I don't think he's hurting for cash too much, unless he wasn't very smart with his money. But he's a guy he's kind of that tweener. He's still remembered probably the best for that hit when he was in college, right? On the Michigan running back. I think that's probably, if you Google Jadeveon Clowney, that's what you're going to see first. He hasn't had a bad NFL career, but he hasn't been like a game breaker, game in and game out. It was a lot of Charles Haley comparisons when he came out, similar to that.
Right.
he had nothing remotely close to a Charles Haley like career thus far, and it's not because he's not talented. It's just maybe he hasn't found the perfect scheme that fits him, and maybe that's really the reason why he hasn't found a team yet. Is he's looking for the perfect right fit so he can finally reach that full potential that he's had.
Yeah, I think ultimately you're right. I think part of it is contractually. There's not a lot of organizations that have an extra, 13 to 18 million for a situational, edge rusher that isn't going to be more of an inside, sort of well-rounded guy in that 3-4, 4-3 scheme. What do you do if you're a defensive coordinator? You're looking for help on the edge. Yeah, you got plenty of bodies in camp. Let's use Green Bay as an example. Let's talk a little bit about their defensive line in the interior. You got Kenny Clark and Dean Lowry manning the nose and defensive positions in the 3-4. What do you do if you're the defensive coordinator in that situation, saying we've got limited amount of talent, we're going to utilize pass rushers in that mold as a stand-up outside linebacker that can also drop into coverage? Do you think that puts a lot of pressure on a guy like Jadeveon Clowney, who is consistently not playing with two feet in the ground and in a 2-point stance?
Yeah, I definitely think Jadeveon Clowney's been a guy that's had his most success with the hand in the ground, right? So that does take him out of some of the teams that want to be a little more versatile and have their edge players be able to do a little bit of both, right? If you look at how important edge players have become in the NFL, look at most every team roster, your top three players are your quarterback, your blindside tackle, which is most often your left tackle, and the guy playing off that edge tackle as a defensive player. So those are consistently the three most highest paid players on a team, and kind of falling into the three most important players for a team success, right? So very often you'll have teams that have great success. Look at the Packers run Aaron Rodgers and Chad Clifton and David Bakhtiari, and you had Clay Matthews with all those really good years. The Packers kind of fell off for a couple of years when they didn't have really good edge rush, and then last year they get the Smiths, and boom, they're back. They're back playing some good football when they have that third piece. So not to say that nose guards aren't important and free safeties aren't important and corners aren't important, but the value of edge right now in the NFL with the way the game's played is super important. So even a guy like Jadeveon Clowney, or a guy that's not really great about doing stand-up stuff, still has high value if he can get after the quarterback. They don't care if you have to be in a 4-point stat. If you can get after the quarterback, dip that shoulder and hit the edge, you're gonna have a wanted player. So I don't think it's a fact that people don't want Jadeveon Clowney. Again, maybe he's looking for the right fit, or he's just trying to work that market and get the most money he can.
Sure, he has limited opportunities now moving forward to say, hey, I've got a window of maybe 4 to 5 more seasons where he could be an effective situational edge rusher. Dave, let's switch gears a little bit now and talk about what we're looking at heading into the 2020 season. What is the big storyline to you heading into the campaign? Everything besides COVID-19. If you're a player, coach, or even a fan, what are you going to look for in terms of the NFL and how we're going to be seeing things and a little bit of a different landscape with the NFL and major college football in the upcoming season?
Yeah, I think if the world was normal right now, right, there would be so many storylines that would be getting the brunt of the news. Right now the big cloud hovering over all sports, and hopefully the MLB and the NBA seasons kind of go off, and NHL, and maybe take a little bit of that tenseness away. But with the coronavirus stuff hovering over everything, there's so many storylines. You have the Patriots storyline now with Cam Newton, and you have Tom Brady and Gronkowski coming back, and Bruce Arians. What can he do with Tom Brady? You got all that stuff going on. Drew Brees is still a talking point. Ed Reed blasted him a couple weeks ago, and the stuff that he said. So that's going to be a talking point throughout the season, and how that goes on. You have Kyler Murray and Lamar Jackson and Patrick Mahomes still bringing that next generation of quarterbacks, and you see that every 10, 12 years or so, you get that next generation of these guys are going to be the best for the next 10 years, and we're at that era now where the Rodgers and the Bradys and the Brees are getting to the end, and the Roethlisbergers and the Rivers, they're kind of pushing to the end. So you have that next generation of quarterbacks coming in. You got a bunch of new coaches as you do every year. You got Mike McCarthy, and you got all these new coaches, and then you have the draft stuff, right? So you have all these different storylines coming in that would be getting the brunt of news stories, and everything would be about all this, and they would already had some mini camps and some OTAs, and you'd have all the paparazzi there filming it and trying to get
Right.
Tom Brady thrown to Gronkowski officially, not at the side high school practices they're doing now. So I think it's definitely unfortunate that what's happening is happening for many other reasons outside of sports. But from an NFL perspective, there are a ton of things happening in the NFL, and some great storylines and some things that are going to be really exciting to hopefully watch and see how they play out and how they develop.
Do you think if the NFL season is somehow, I want to knock on some wood here, I'm going to knock on my desk, is either shortened, truncated, or delayed indefinitely, or canceled even, do we see the 2020 NFL draft by the Green Bay Packers as a absolute steal of a player like Jordan Love there at the 26th spot? I know we try and talk about sort of the league-wide scope. The draft was a big hit for a number of teams. Talk about the Raiders, who put Henry Ruggs number one. He was projected to be maybe the second or third receiver taken. I think they said there was something like 145 receivers taken in this draft. Green Bay took none of them. Do you think that that changes the perspective of not only fans, but maybe within the organization about, hey, we've got a guy who's in a position here where maybe can be in the building for another year before he has to potentially go into battle?
Yeah, I think that was a narrative after the draft, right? Is, well, maybe the Packers were planning for the season not to happen, and maybe they wanted to take this guy. So I think there's kind of a two-way street thinking there, right? Okay, let's say for some reason the season doesn't happen at all, and they got this guy, and the Packers knew it, and they got this person. If the season doesn't happen at all, I think it's a crapshoot, because it doesn't matter if you drafted him last year or this year. He's not going to get any work within the system. He's not going to get any
Right. He's not even in the
preseason
building.
games. He's not going to get in the
He
building,
hasn't
get the
even got his
coaching,
key
right?
card yet. We
Yeah,
have more access to the building than he does.
exactly, right? He could drive by just like everybody else does. But if there is some kind of shortened season, something like the NBA's ends up doing, or the NHL, or what Major League Baseball is doing, right? Shrinking their season in half. If there's something along those lines, then yeah, it definitely helps the Packers out drafting a guy they don't need right away. I don't necessarily agree with what Brett Favre said this week about Packers using Jordan Love as Taysom Hill. I think Jordan Love is exponentially a better talented passer than Taysom Hill, from athletic ability, kind of toss a piece. But I think Jordan Love right now is a better passer than Taysom Hill. So I don't know if that's something they should be looking at. And again, but stuff like that, if you don't have the preseason time and you don't have that time, if it's shortened down, you're not going to have all the time to build these cool packages and these fun packages. And Jordan Love's just going to be learning. But in any way, shape, or form, if the season's shortened and they still have some kind of a season, then definitely I think it does help the Packers that they drafted a guy that they don't need right away, and he can just learn and learn and learn. But if there's no season at all, it's kind of a toss up. Doesn't really matter.
I was kind of disappointed that Brett Favre didn't, at some point in that interview with Mike Ruffalo from ESPN, say, what did Taysom Hill and Jordan Love have in common? Do we know the answer to that trivia question, Dave? I hope.
Other than being Packer quarterbacks at one time, I don't know if there's another one there. You have to enlighten me.
I'm going to amend my question. We've got two things that Jordan Love and Taysom Hill, backup quarterback for the New Orleans Saints, have in common. They both played their college football in the great state of Utah.
True.
Taysom
I
Hill
didn't think
played
of
college
that.
football at
True.
Brigham Young University.
Brigham Young.
Interesting. We could talk on and on and on about the dynamics of Taysom Hill and the one that got away. I personally don't think he would have fit in the system. Maybe Mike McCarthy is still coaching and we never even heard of Matt LaFleur. Maybe we make the playoffs and we don't have to start with Brett Hundley. There's so many just fascinating dynamics with Taysom Hill. I think at some point he will be a starter, but I do think they made a mistake in letting Teddy Bridgewater sign with Carolina, who's a division rival. Should be interesting to see how that lines up in the upcoming season. So my name is Travis Pipes. He is Dave Mogensen, on assignment in Quincy, Illinois, doing some work down in the great state of Illinois. Wanted to say thanks for everybody for tuning in tonight to Double Coverage Radio, who is sponsored by, for all of our apparel, screen printing, and embroidery needs, with Hansen Screen Printing in Elkhorn, Wisconsin. Nate Hansen, I think he's still putting in the hours at the shop. Maybe he's working on some stuff for Double Coverage Radio. We'll take a look at that, one of our live shows. Check us out on the web at www.doublecoverageradio.com. We're available streaming online on Twitter at doublecoverage13, at Double Coverage Radio on Instagram, and of course, watching us right here live on Facebook. We will tune in next week for another show on our fantastic Tuesday nights. We'll be bringing in some guests on our Chalk Talk series and other Wisconsin professional Preps to the Pros series. And as always, thank you for tuning in. Have a great rest of your week. And more importantly, have a great 4th of July. Stay safe, and we will see you next time. Dave, have a great night. Have a great rest of your trip. We'll see you next time.